Greetings, conservatives. This is your humble host, John Moraga, and we are back with more ConservaCast. We look forward to keeping you informed with the latest and most relevant commentary of conservative issues. So without further ado, here are a few topics I'd like to discuss.
Well, this may be a shorter ConservaCast, but who knows? I've said that before, and we'll see how long I may be going on here. But hopefully, it's actually something that you can enjoy if I kind of take my time and you can get a little bit more benefit out of this. I'm going to be talking today about food and the coronavirus, obviously, still going on, and briefly about Israeli politics. So you don't want to miss this one. It's a pretty interesting ConservaCast. But I did want to talk about food second. So let's talk about the coronavirus very briefly here. I said in the last ConservaCast that I was going to tell you a way that you could potentially make money during this thing. Well, this isn't a get rich quick. It's not. In fact, it's pretty difficult if you think about it, but it is realistic. There's a couple ways that I've kind of thought about trying out myself and seeing how things go, but for you to also consider. One is stocks. The market has kind of plummeted for a while, but there are some stocks, and I'm not going to give you advice and do, I'm not that Kramer guy or whatever it is, and I don't claim to be a business management person, but it is something worth looking into. I don't know how beneficial penny stocks are, or even normative stocks, Starbucks even. Was a company that actually took a dip and is now starting to kind of trickle back up, or um, other companies that you might want to look into. I'm not going to tell you specific ones, but the stock market is a place where you could potentially make some money now. Because if you look at the trends, a lot of them have dipped, and at some point, long term, they're probably going to pick back up. Some of the more bigger, reliable companies that have been out there, they took a hit, but they're going to spring back up. Now, some people have already found that out and they've started to buy the stocks, which is why we had a little bit of a increase not too long ago. But it is an avenue that you might want to consider. Go do some research. Go call some consultants. Go look online. Do some homework, and see what might be a good investment. I'm just saying that um, not to sound cynical, but to have make something positive out of this whole negative situation where you might be able to regain it. Now, I don't think it's something short term because you've got to wait for this to kind of pass and then companies start to pick back up and they're able to regain the losses that they made. But it is a way that you might want to consider now. Hey, while they're down, why don't I try and buy some stocks that I think or believe or have done the research to know they'll probably pick up in the next year, 2 years, 5 years. And 5 years from now, you may be looking back and saying, wow, I'm pretty glad I bought 10, 100, 1,000 shares of whatever company. I don't know your financial status. So, 1, 2, 10, 20, 100, 1,000 shares of some company 5 years from now, you may be very appreciative that you did the homework and you took the time to figure out which companies might be best suited to invest in now. So the sooner the better, and strike while it's hot, so to speak. The other thing I was thinking is for people who have been putting off or thinking about starting a small business, right now, this very day that you're seeing this, more than likely, if you're seeing this once it's been put out or within a week or two of it being put out, is probably not the right time to start a business in the midst of all this. But I would advise write a business plan, write your your whole projection of things. It's hard to do market research right now because the market is just so fluctuated, and you can't really get input as to people's buying power or buying trends or disposable income. Um, but that aside, I mean that's huge. You do want to see, where is there a need? How can you fill that need? What is it? What product are you providing for people, or what service are you providing for people that they may want to support or patronize your business, or whatever the case. You want to do that research ahead of time so that you kind of have a feeling. But if there's something that you've been itching to do and you really haven't, start looking at 6 months down the road, possibly a year, depending, because we don't know how long this is going to last. But unfortunately, unfortunately, it's sad. A lot of small to medium sized businesses, and even actually big businesses, because that's why, as I just previously mentioned, the stock market has crashed. So, well, not crashed, but it's really just gone out the window. Even they're feeling the pinch, but especially medium and small sized businesses, mom and pop stores, as they're known or they're called, or just even if they have a few branches, a few chains of things, because of the nature of what's going on, and however long whatever length it's sustained is going to impact it even more. But if you start to look ahead, what small businesses that what small businesses will be in need in another month, 6 months, a year? I mean, right now, if you were able to produce it, you'd probably be making a killing selling toilet paper. It's ridiculous what's still out there. Or even recently, bread was a big commodity. But now, because it was even hard to have independent places do it, because you needed places to make it that were approved, government approved licensing at bakeries or shops. I mean, there is a company that my wife and I used to buy challah bread, if you know what that is. We get it for Friday nights and our meals and all. They're shut down. They're shut down. So we had to find another place. And actually, we're still kind of considering a few places. We haven't actually found a new place, so we're still looking. But I'm just saying, as an example, there can be a niche, there can be a void to fill in the next 6 months or year or so. And if you've already been kind of at the edge, oh, you know what? I think this would be a good idea for a business. I think this would be a good idea to start. If it's something that you think might be good once the economy starts to get moving, because I'm pretty confident we're not going to see years or decades of just a crash of the American economy and system, the free market system in America. Eventually, this too will pass. This virus will pass. And when that does, I think it might be wise to start thinking about, what can I do that might be profitable when all this happens, or when all this, starts to subside. What is it? What talents do I have? What infrastructure do I have in place? What kind of ideas do I have? Start putting it down on paper. Start looking at what it would take to actually make this happen. Now, fair warning, fair warning, many, many small businesses don't succeed necessarily. And even if they do, it can take some time. And so you're looking at a long game as well, similar to stocks or something. You're looking at a long game for that. And so I'm not, I said, on the offset. I don't have a get rich quick scheme. I don't have, oh, go to this site and you can, find this here. I'm just offering some sound advice. Start looking at what will be profitable in the next 6 months to a year, or shorter, longer, give or take, whether it's the stock market, and you can find good stocks that have taken a dive but have the real promise of rejuvenating, or starting a business once this subsides. I mean, those are just two examples that you might want to start thinking about, and to try and turn a really negative situation that we're experiencing right now into something positive, especially for those of you who may have lost your job. It's You've been basically ordered to stay home because it's non-essential, so to speak, and you really, at this point, don't have a whole lot of other options. There still can be another job to find. There still can be other means of employment, by all means. And that's another thing, not as big, but that's another thing to consider. This may be the opportunity to look at a career change, reinventing what your skills are in certain ways. So I'm just trying to offer some positive ideas of for what's happening right now. That being said, to talk about food and to be a little not so serious again. Now I got to tell you again, as many of you may know, I'm out here in California, and I started to see the trickle of things go away. Uh, One day, my wife came home and she said, "Oh, these are the only types of corn tortillas I was able to find at the store." I looked at them. I said, "Oh, that's weird. Maybe I could use them, maybe not." And I asked her, I'm like, "Well, why was it gone? Why are all the other ones that we normally get gone?" This was at the very early stages of the panic buying. So she tells me, "Well, I went to the store and just all the tortillas are gone." Being a, you know, husband that I am, I I don't want to say I didn't believe her. It's a little extreme, but I had questions. I never heard of an entire tortilla section being depleted. So it was a little odd to me. Understandably, reasonably, I figured maybe she was exaggerating that they were all gone. And I thought, I bet you if I go to the store, I'll find some. I bet you if I go out there, I could find some. And she may not have known where to look or something. I don't know what I was thinking. I was like, all right, didn't want to start a contentious conversation, so I left it alone. All right, we'll eat them. Not bad. Okay, it still works. And she proceeds to tell me that, oh yeah, one of the guys there who works at the store was telling her that they had initially cut back hours because they weren't able to man the store. They didn't have the ability to uh, give them their hours. And then they were starting to call people back. It was a very just confusing situation. He said that he didn't have time to stock what they had, and so the shelves started to get a little depleted. Well, again, that was at the early stages. Then I go and she tells me she goes to another store and tells me, "Oh, all the Clorox wipes are gone. All the cleaning wipes are gone." I'm like, that's weird." Again, thinking maybe she just didn't know or I don't know. If I go, I'll find them. My famous last words. If I go, I could find them. So I wait about a week or so, and she goes back to the store. She comes back. She says, "Nope, they're still out. They're still out." I'm like, "That's really odd." Now I know sometimes the store can run out of certain things, and it's just temporary. But when it was sustained, I started thinking, "This is odd. This is weird." And then it was almost like out of nowhere, there was this huge, huge panic buying. And this is when things really started. It was almost like a gradual. Some people caught wind of it earlier than others, and they started buying their toilet paper, their bread, their meats, whatever it was, and it started to trickle. And then it almost seemed like one day, boom, it was gone. And so I went into the store and I saw no bread. And this isn't an experience unique to me. This is what many of you have already seen. There's no bread. To me, I've told people, it reminded me, I'm old enough to remember back in the 80s when the Cold War was going on and Reagan was in office, and I would see some news stories, even though I was a kid or young, either news stories or commentary where they'd have a camera in the stores of the Soviet Union, and you would see nothing on the shelves, and you'd see lines outside the door, and it was this whole propaganda campaign, and it worked. to say we don't want to be like the Soviet Union. We don't want to live under that type of government. And this is why we live in America and freedom. And you can go to the store and there's just shelves there. There's no concern about it at all. To me, it was a flashback. Like, I never thought we would have those situations. And it was just weird to see such depletion of resources. Now, one caveat to keep in mind that, not to say that we became them, because our situation is different. There, we still do have the resources. We're having a whole difficult time getting it out there, getting it into the stores. Now, to put it in context, it has started to kind of reach its peak, and there are now toilet paper and bread and meats and things starting to come in, because it was never really a lack of resources because we couldn't make things or produce things. It was because of certain chains of delivering and certain warehouses, etc., getting things there. But anyway, it was just mind blowing that I couldn't find certain foods or certain products. And so I thought, okay, all this, I'm getting to the point of making food and recipes and stuff like that. But hopefully this is just at least some something to feed your mind as you're making food or doing certain things, and you just listen to the story here. So I I figured, okay, well, there's no bread, there's no pre-made tortillas, there's not even oatmeal in the store. So I got real Mexican. That's right. The Mexican came out in me. I started thinking, oh well, uh, a Mexican knows how to survive. A Mexican knows how to use resources. This Mexican can handle this. All I need is some beans, some bagged pinto beans, and some flour, a little bit of oil. I'll be okay because I could make pots and pots of beans and season them up and make them taste real nice. I could make my own tortillas and roll them out and make them taste real nice. It takes a little bit more work to boil and make the beans and roll out the tortillas and have the roller and flip them and make each one by themselves. But hey, times are tough. I just need to buckle down and I can survive this. I can provide for my family. I can survive. My family can survive this. They just learn a little bit more about their ethnic background and we'll be okay. hmm What do you think happened? Every other Mexican in California had the same mentality. hmm Whether they were born here as I was and have generations here and were basically ethnically Mexican, not actually from Mexico, or whether they actually were from Mexico and they're here illegally, there were no pinto beans in the store. There was no flour in the store. It got rough. It got real rough. I started thinking, oh boy, I can't even go into survival Mexican mode now. I can't even turn it on. I can't even utilize the tricks and trades that my loving mother, God bless her soul, she's now passed away, passed on to me. And living very frugally, but yet eating really good food just took a lot more work. But hey, I was willing to do it. But you can't do it if you don't have the resources to do it. So I gotta say, it got pretty rough there for about a week. And even within that week, we were still able to sustain things. And that's why, as I said, it was a lot different than what was seen in the news clips and the propaganda campaigns during the Cold War in the 80s, because we were still able to buy the freshly made bread from the bakery at the store. They still had their resources. It was a little bit more expensive, and we got more of it. Um, I got a few packages of pita bread that wasn't very well known for some people. You could still use that for things. I mean, and there were a number of other resources. We still had eggs in our refrigerator. We still had a number of food items in our home. But we usually, as many of you do, you shop in advance. You get foods in advance. And as time started going by, it became less and less safe, or even permitted for that matter, to go out to eat. And my wife and family and I, we've been trying to cut back on how much we went out to eat anyway. And so it just gave us all that more reason. Hey, it really is time to really buckle down and eat at home, eat a little healthier, control what we eat and take in. But so we were still able to sustain, but it just got really concerning that, we still have some things, but we don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know if those shelves in those stores will come back online, which eventually they did. And I was able to find some flour. Still can't find the beans. Maybe they'll still come back online. But now that I have the flour, I will be making my own tortillas. Those are going to be good. Mm, mm. I'm getting hungry right now thinking of it. So that leads, good segue, into a recipe that I do want to give you. Now I'm going to list the ingredients and what needs to be included in there, but I'm going to tell you how to prepare this. Now this is a meal that's very quick. It's very simple. It's not something that's exotic or gourmet, although just depending, it can be elevated, so to speak, in terms. It's something that I was told called migas. I don't know if that's the exact term or not, but basically what you do is you're going to not fully crispy deep fry some corn tortillas. So what you would do is get a package of corn tortillas and cut them up into eighths or sixteenths. And then, even then, after that, you would kind of tear them apart. So they're just shredded. It's just kind of like a peeled off batch of tortillas. Now, depending on your ratio, depending on how much you want to eat, or depending on how much you're going to feed somebody else, I'll give the recipe for a one person uh, meal of this. But basically, what you want to do is put a good level of oil into a pan, and I'd say get it to the edge of it, about maybe a quarter of an inch to half inch, just depending. And you can modify in just a moment here when I explain it to you. So you get the oil boiling on about, well, I shouldn't say boiling. You get the oil heated up to about, a medium to medium high flame, depending on your stove. You get the oil hot enough, and then you put in the tortillas. So first, heat the oil, put in the corn tortillas. Once you get the corn tortillas in there, keep stirring them, get them heated, and then just before they start to actually get crispy like a chip, you uh, will turn off the flame or turn down the flame, just depending. And depending on how much oil you put in, if there's a lot of excess oil, you'll want to drain whatever excess oil in, because most of that oil will be soaked up into the tortillas, and you don't want to have a bath of the tortillas in there. So you're going to drain whatever excess oil is in there. Now, prior to that, uh, or you could be doing it at the same time or afterwards, but preferably prior to that, you want to scramble up some eggs. Now, usually the way that I scramble up eggs are that I scramble them and add a little bit of milk to the eggs. Not much, but just anywhere from about a quarter of a cup or less into the eggs. To me, that usually helps to make them a little more fluffier when you cook them. Now, once they're beaten up and you whip them up in a medium flame, this time maybe medium low flame, just depends. You'll put the eggs into the pan of tortillas and you'll keep stirring that mix. Now, what you'll notice is that the tortillas will start to revert back to being a little more flappy or soft. But as you continue to cook the eggs, you'll start to get a little bit more consistency. Now, that's why it's important that prior to putting the eggs in, you want to make sure that they get too close to a crispy texture, because once you put the eggs in, they start to soften up again. Now, once you start to stir that in and you see that the eggs are nearly done, not completely, but nearly done, you'll put some shredded cheese on top of that. And you'll stir that up a bit. And then once the eggs actually are done, then you'll put it on a low flame, kind of flap over the layers of tortillas and eggs, and put some more shredded cheese on top of that. Then you'll basically turn off the flame, let that sit for just a little while, a few minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, and then come back to it as it's been sitting, and then flap it over again, mix it again, so that you have the cheese that was on top getting into the mixture a little bit so that it doesn't have a complete melting, but it's warm enough and stringy enough that it melts into it. And that's basically all that it is. Probably said more and gave more directions than necessary, but you're basically deep frying some corn tortillas, beating up some eggs inside of it, whipping it up, putting a few flaps over it, putting cheese on top of it. And then once it's served, it's typically served with whatever is your preference for salsa or some type of hot sauce. I usually buy some salsa, and because I'm just like that, I usually eat whole raw habanero chilies with it. I don't know. I eat maybe about 3 or 4 of them, depending on the day. My wife looks over at me and thinks I'm crazy, and she always gives me this look like I would probably die if I had a half of a bite, few seeds of those habanero chilies. But I don't know. Maybe I burned off my taste buds, but I usually pop habanero chilies as I'm eating it. So you've got a bowl or sometimes a plate with the migas in it. Put some salsa on top, mix it up even more in the bowl, and if you choose to do so, you'll eat it with some habaneros. And it's supposed to be not the not hottest thing. It's supposed to be a little bit spicy. And you could alternatively forego the salsa, forego the habanero chilies, but that's typically the way that I've prepared them and have eaten them. Now, I am still looking through and trying to get some recipes that some of you may have sent. But for now, I wanted to kick this off by providing you at least one recipe and giving you something from home that you might enjoy. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to send me a message. Otherwise, as I said, it's pretty straightforward. I probably gave more direction than necessary for it. The last thing that I did want to talk about briefly, Israel's political situation. And I'll just briefly touch on this. For those of you who don't know, recently, um, Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been the sitting prime minister for a while, the longest sitting prime minister in Israel's history, he has agreed to form a unity government with his rival in the last 3 elections within a year. Yes, 3 elections within a year. And I've done several other videos about Israel politics and how that works, but they've had some pretty political instability in their country. And in fact, if it wasn't for the coronavirus hitting Israel also, this might not have happened either, and they may have needed to go to a fourth election. Um, but because it has Benny Gantz has decided to join with Benjamin Netanyahu and have what they consider a rotational government. And basically, what that means is that Benjamin Netanyahu will remain the prime minister for the next 16 months or 18 months. Yeah, I believe it's 18 months. And then Benny Gantz, his rival, who he campaigned against, will actually take over the premiership and become the prime minister of Israel for a period of time, and they'll work out the rotation of that. It's a very weird situation that we're not too familiar in having in our government. But the reason that this happened, just to get a little bit deeper into what actually occurred. So Israel has multiple parties. In the US, we have the Republicans and Democrats, and to some extent the independents and other. We do have other parties, but they're so small that we are essentially by default a two-party system. Well, in Israel, they have multiple parties that actually do have more participants and have more power, and so it makes it a lot more complicated, and it's a parliamentary system. So basically, what happened was Netanyahu heads the Likud party, and Benny Gantz headed the Blue and White party. Well, basically, even they both have to join with other smaller parties in order to get a majority of the seats in their government called the Knesset. And so, out of the 120 seats available, they have to get 61 or more to form the majority government. Well, what typically happens is the even though there are big parties, in this case the Likud and the Blue and White, they still are far less than the 61 needed. So in this case, the Likud got 35, 36, 37-ish seats, and Blue and White got a pretty comparable amount. Well, what usually happens is that one of these parties will go to the other smaller parties and say, hey, come join us. And then we can make up the difference in that. Even though we're not part of the same party, we can make an alliance, so to speak. And so they can get to the 61 or more. Well, because neither of the two big parties could get the alliance of these smaller parties to form 61, none of them were able to form the government that they needed to, which is why they had three elections, because they kept trying to elect people that would make it possible to get the 61 plus. Well, technically, Benny Gantz from the Blue and White Party was able to get 61 plus people or participants for his government. However, it would have theoretically required one of the parties that only had about maybe 12 or 13 uh, participants to join his and other smaller parties. But that one party that would have joined him was an Arab party. An Arab party that has never um, really acknowledged the legitimacy of Israel in the first place. Now, Israel allows them to take part in the political system and allows them to be part of the government because they want to have more of a democratic voice, but they have never been able to join another party to make the 61 and have control and power. Well, when Benny Gantz kind of gave indication that he would allow them to join his. So let's just say, for round numbers, Benny Gantz had 35. He was able to get two or three other smaller parties to get up to 50. Well, this Arab party would have had 12 or 13 to put him over the 61 seats. Well, what happened was when Benny Gantz Blue and White Party was looking at the Arab party to join, as they came over, the Blue and White Party itself broke apart because they said, no, 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 no. We can never really have an Arab party, even if it was to defeat Netanyahu and move him from office. We can't have them come into the Blue and White Party to take part. So Benny Gantz, the Netanyahu's rival, basically had to dissolve his own party because he didn't have the support of the whole party to join with the Arab party. As a result of that, he basically took what was left of his Blue and White Party, added it to Netanyahu's alliance of parties, which then took them over the 61 seats that they needed. And that's how they are now having a rotation government. a unity rotating government. Netanyahu was able to stay in power for a while and then hand over the reins to Gantz sometime next year. So, I know that's a lot of inside baseball, and it gets even deeper into that. I just didn't want to bombard kind of a mid-level inside baseball with the Israeli politics. Now, what will happen and what will transpire in the next 16 months, who knows? Netanyahu still has some legal issues that he's trying to overcome, and we'll see what happens. But that's just kind of what's been happening recently in Israel. Well, I encourage you guys. Again, I said in the last video, if you hadn't already checked it out, I do have my new ministry, noslogos.org, noslogos.org, GNOSLOGOS.org, and there's a link down below. I encourage you guys to check that out. There will be more videos coming up on that, articles, social media, and during this time again, stay positive, stay upbeat. Um, as I said, I don't want to bombard too much religious speech, so to speak. I don't shy away from it by any means, as you know if you've seen these. But I want to kind of provide encouragement to anybody who may be either actually suffering from some of the symptoms of COVID-19 or who have suffered a loss of employment or work or anything else, psychologically, spiritually. I do want to keep you all in prayers that you have some type of encounter with God and you're able to rely on your faith even stronger.
Thanks for joining us once again, and we hope you will invite your friends and family to join us in our efforts to champion conservatism for generations to come.